Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media. That's Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. Also, if you want to become a club member, go to the Ampire Media YouTube page. See the word join, do this on your laptop, see the word join, click on there, find the level of membership you want, and we'll go from there. Today, I'm joined by Greg Cosell, who, of course, is part of the NFL Matchup. He's the executive producer and analyst on the show. He also has been a producer with NFL Films for 44 years. Folks, few people put in the effort to watch and learn the game like Greg Cosell. So that's why I wanted to have him on. We're going to talk about the quarterbacks. Of course, we talk about Cliff Kingsbury's offense, what he thinks of the Commanders' moves this offseason, whether it's in free agency or the draft, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So stay tuned for that. Great guest. As always, you're going to enjoy it because he provides really good insight gleaned from talking to people in the league, but also from his own work. Just puts in hours and hours of film work. So stay tuned for that. I have one little nugget, and that's about it. Washington is working to hire Brandon Sosna, who I think that's how you pronounce it, who had been in Detroit's front office the last 2 years. So obviously Lance Newmark would know him very well. He's going to be hired into we don't know the position yet. It's just called a prominent position within the front office, according to a source. And then I do know they also interviewed Jake Rosenberg, who was a former Eagles VP. I'll be honest, I know somebody who knows him pretty well and was surprised I guess for him, surprised they didn't hire him, but he doesn't know Sosna. So it wasn't like he thinks it's, bad by the organization to hire him. He just doesn't know the other guy, and he does know Rosenberg and thinks very highly of him. So anyways, but obviously Newmark would know Sosna very well, and he's only 31. So he could be kind of an up and comer here, but we'll see. Anyways, just a continued revamping of the front office. Couple of changes already. There's more scouting changes that have some taken place, some pro scouts in and out. And there'll be some more over the next week or a couple of weeks as they basically reshuffle some of the front office with scouts and some other positions. And so we'll see how that all shakes out. Anyways, that's it for me. Here's a guy you want, Greg Cosell. Here's my conversation with the esteemed one. So enjoy. But Greg, before we get into some of the stuff with the Commanders, I do want people to understand how you've put yourself in this position and the work that goes into the knowledge that you have gained. So just, I don't know if you can give kind of a summation of the work that you put in to gain this knowledge and the things that you do to be able to share this insight.
Well, I'll give you just the Cliff Notes version in a sense of my career. I created the NFL Matchup Show in the mid-'80s. So essentially, I created X&O football on television. And then in 1991 or two, we got access to the coaching tape, which is the same tape, of course, that coaches and players use to evaluate game plan study. So I've been studying coaching tape since 1991, 92. And of course, all through those years, I've gotten an opportunity to get to know coaches and personnel people, and you're constantly learning. But what I basically do every day is watch tape. During the season, obviously, I do the NFL Matchup Show. I'm now on that show as well as producing it to a large extent. And it's just NFL tape every single day. Then as soon as the NFL season ends, I jump right into watching college tape for the draft. And, I'm a believer that you need to watch a lot of tape and because that's really what tells you about a player. So, depending on position, I could watch, 7 or 8 games. Quarterbacks, very often, I end up watching, I start watching prior to their last year. So for a lot of the quarterbacks in this year's draft, including Jaden Daniels, I watched probably 7 or 8 games of Jaden Daniels from the 2022 season, and then probably 8 or 9 games of Jaden Daniels from this past 2023 season. And that's what I do with most quarterbacks. And defensive players, John, you have to watch full games because, you can't look at a linebacker and say, well, he had 85 tackles and I'm just going to look at those tackles. Those are his good plays and you like to see those, but you have to watch the full games. So basically all year round, I sit and grind tape. Very often, if I meet people, they say, man, I'd love your job to have your job. And then I tell them that I work 70, 75 hours a week for 7, 8 months out of the year. And they say, well, maybe I don't want your job. So, it's just grinding work and work and work, and you're constantly learning. I'm a big believer in that. That's why I try to speak to coaches as much as I can, because I feel like when you think you know, that's when you don't know. So you have to constantly learn. And it's interesting to me how you hear so many different, I don't want to say opinions, because when you watch tape, it's not an opinion per se, but you
Right.
hear different interpretations from coaches of what they see on tape,
Yes.
and of the same player. So yeah, and I find that really, really fascinating. And it's one reason why nobody gets every evaluation correct. Because
Right.
at the end of the day, John, and you know this, you've been doing this for a while, it's still human beings evaluating human beings. No matter what the metrics are and the analytics, you still have to watch a guy play and get a sense of how you see him projecting and transitioning to the league. And that comes down to your sense of what you think works, what doesn't work, and evaluating the player. You know, reciting a statistic based on uh, his college numbers doesn't really mean a lot when you think about then putting him in an NFL game.
Right. And you know what I've also found, Greg, with like I love to watch the film of the Commanders games, et cetera. I always find like the 10th time I watch the same play, I still pick something up.
Ah,
Which to be honest, always kind of like, oh wow, I just saw this. That's why it's always putting pieces in the puzzle.
yeah, John, you're so right. In fact, because during the season I have to get through as many teams and games as possible, and I don't have necessarily that luxury. So very often when
Right.
I'm watching tape, I just wish, that a coach was sitting right here with me, because I say to myself, God, there's probably 5 things I'm not seeing at all on this play, and I wish the coach was right here and could say, oh yeah, that's what's happening, or that's why we did this, or whatever it may be. But, unfortunately, when you're one person, and that's all I am, one person, you can't see everything.
Right.
And you have to also understand, John, and I'm a big believer in this, that there's certain things you're not going to know. You'd
Right.
have to be in the meeting rooms. You'd have to be in the installation rooms. You'd have to be involved in that process in order to know everything. There's just certain things you don't know. In fact, I've had players, ex-players, former players who I've gotten to know say, hey, one of the reasons I really like listening to you is if you don't know something, you say it, because
Right.
it's not possible to know everything. You just can't, because you're not part of the process.
Right. And I've always found that too, that my job is watch it here, ask there. So that
Yeah.
way you can see something, you can go ask and find out, did I interpret this right? And they might say, well, yeah, but, and it's always that but that gives me the information that I need.
Yeah.
So now, speaking of watching the film and Jaden Daniels, we'll start there. I want to get into Cliff Kingsbury too in a minute.
Sure.
With Jaden Daniels, what did you see as far as the biggest
Yeah.
leap from year one LSU to year two?
Well, I would almost go back to year one at ASU, because Jaden Daniels had a really strong freshman season. A lot of people might forget that he was throwing to Brandon Ayuk that year,
Right.
but he's really improved in incremental ways and in significant ways. And I would say that his 2 years at LSU were really, really good. And what I really liked about Jaden Daniels, is I don't think, based on tape study, and that's all I can speak about. I've heard he's a great, great kid too. I don't know Jaden Daniels, but I've heard he's a great, great kid. He's sort of part of that Southern California triumvirate. He's really close with Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud. They're all from the same general area. But he's not just a runner. Obviously he's incredibly dynamic, but I think as he's played more, he's a pocket quarterback. He leaves the pocket when it's, for the most part, a last resort. Obviously, there will be times, every quarterback that can make plays with their legs will leave at times when they don't have to. They'll leave prematurely. But for the most part, he lets the system work. I thought one of the things that really stood out this year in his LSU tape was his willingness to work through the progressions and make progression read throws, and particularly make throws in the middle of the field between the numbers, which for a lot of quarterbacks coming from college to the NFL, John, and you know this, is an issue, because the hash marks are closer, and sometimes it seems to young quarterbacks like there's 15 defenders on the field when they have to make throws in the middle of the field, because it's tighter. In college, you don't necessarily have that issue because the hash marks are wider and the defense has to stretch horizontally to deal with that. And so therefore the middle is often wide open, and sometimes seam balls, it seems like no one's there on defense. But I thought he really, really improved in that regard. He doesn't have a power arm, but he certainly can make all the throws. Every once in a while, a deep ball would kind of lose energy on the back end. That's not the strength of his game. But he threw a great slot fade. He threw a ton of those to Malik Neighbors, threw a great slot fade. And I just thought that there was a calmness and a poise and composure to his game. He played effectively and efficiently from the pocket, and he made the kinds of throws that you see in NFL games. He wasn't one of those guys that built up his numbers, throwing, tunnel screens,
Right.
which theoretically anybody could throw.
Right. And, when did you look at him as like being a strong possibility for as high a pick as he went?
I would say last summer when I watched his 2022 tape, I said to myself, and I don't have my notes right in front of me at the moment. I'm not going to sit here and read my notes to everybody. But I remember last year after I watched his 2022 tape, thinking that with continued improvement, that this guy is a first round type player. Now, I'm not one of those people that say, make lists. I'm not a list guy, so I don't sit here and say, well, he'll be a top 5 pick, or he'll be this, he'll be that. But I mean, I thought that he had first round traits based on what I saw a year ago. He needed to, gain a little weight. He needed to just mature physically, as well. He's still a young kid. But that's what I saw a year ago. And then I really, really liked his tape this year. Obviously, they put up a ton of points. I'm not a believer in the argument, well, he's throwing to good receivers. Well, that's the NFL.
Right.
You're throwing to good receivers. I guess we're going to say Joe Burrow's no good because he's throwing to good receivers. I mean, that's a pointless argument to me, but and plus, and I learned this, and I was very fortunate in my career. Maybe the one of the best parts of my career was I got to know Bill Walsh, and one of the things he told me early on when I got to know him was, when you evaluate a quarterback, you have to isolate the traits and attributes of the quarterback. That's what you're studying. You're studying the quarterback. And I've taken that with me throughout my career. You're studying the quarterback. There are many reasons why a quarterback might put up big numbers, not big numbers, but you are studying the quarterback. So it doesn't matter to me who he's throwing the ball to.
Were you good with Washington picking him at 2?
Yes. Yes. I mean,
And I know I heard you talk about him before the draft. So I know that all the stuff you said, I've heard you.
Yeah. I mean, I think just in terms of sheer, well, let's put it this way. I would say that the toolsiest quarterback in this draft, which is different than saying maybe the best prospect, because you never know what happens when they get to the NFL, how they're coached, what they're asked to do, the team they're on. As you know, John, there's 20 different variables. I thought the toolsiest quarterback in the draft was Drake May. I thought the quarterback that controlled the ball the best was Caleb Williams, but I thought Daniels was really, really good in almost every area. Maybe he's not the best at one, but I thought he was really good in all.
Okay. And so how do you feel like his game will translate to the NFL in a Cliff Kingsbury offense?
I think it'll translate really well. I assume Kingsbury will run his offense. I think that's why you hire Kingsbury. I don't think you hire Kingsbury to say, well, you're going to do it this way, which is not the way you've been doing it. So you're going to change up. I don't think you hire him for that reason. So in an ideal world, I think you're going to get a lot of, 3 wide looks, spread looks. Don't forget that spreads out the defense too. That can play into the run game element that Daniels gives you. And I'm talking about the design run game element.
Yeah.
You don't want to overdo that simply because he's, the body type, but still, it's a weapon. He's an explosive athlete, and you do want to take advantage of that. So, but I think, the other thing too that spreading things out does for a quarterback, a particularly young quarterback, is sometimes it helps him understanding what he's seeing, because defenses have to declare. And what you're trying to do with quarterbacks, all quarterbacks, but certainly young quarterbacks, is you're trying to give them as much information as possible before the snap of the ball. And you can do that with your use of personnel and your use of formations, your use of motion, a number of factors, but that's what you're trying to do, because everything is going to be a little faster for every quarterback coming in the NFL. And if they have to start trying to figure it out as they drop back, then it all happens way too fast.
Right. Do you like the Kingsbury offense?
I think any offense I think can be effective, depending on who's running it.
Mhm.
There's many ways to be successful running offense in the league. Um, you know, I think that I think it can be for sure. I guess the one thing I always think about, and I'm not going to sit here and say I'm an expert on it, John. I mean, it's not
Right.
like I know every detail of the Cliff Kingsbury offense, and maybe if he was sitting here, he'd say, "Oh no, you're wrong." But I think that in this league, at some point, you've got to run the football.
Right.
Now, and I think at some point, you got to line up and say, here we come, we're going to run. Because you can run it many different ways. You can run it at a spread and be really, really effective. But, obviously, as you get closer to the goal line, I'm not talking about inside the 5 yard line, but as the field starts to shrink, the spread stuff, because the vertical part gets taken away. So you don't have the vertical and the horizontal spread. You've only got the horizontal spread.
Mhm.
So I think at some point you do have to line up and run the ball with some kind of power run game, whether you want to do it in a zone game or gap scheme, which is man blocking. I think so. We'll see. I mean, I think they've got the kind of backs that can do that. So I'm curious. That's one of the things I'm very curious to see with the offense, with the personnel, is how they go about implementing the run game. And I'm not, look, it's mid-May. I don't think we know the answer to that.
Right. No, we know what they say.
Right.
We'll see what they do. And
Right.
I
I
know
mean,
what,
a
yeah,
lot of things are said right now,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, like, last year we heard that they were going to do more and then they threw the ball 70% of the time. What do you think the biggest mistakes teams make with rookie quarterbacks, and what can Washington do to avoid that?
Well, I think mistakes often accrue from what they're asked to do given the team that they're on, John. In other words, you really don't want your rookie quarterback to be in a situation where he has to throw the ball, or drop back, I should say, drop back 35, 40, 45 times a game. I think that's a tough way to go for a rookie quarterback, because that's really hard to do. So, I think in an ideal world, what you want is your rookie quarterback to be part of a more complete team where in any given week, yeah, maybe the game does present itself where he might have to drop back 40 times, but that's not the way you want to approach it from a philosophical and game plan perspective. And I think they're trying to do that. Defense plays a major part in this, because obviously you don't want to feel that a rookie quarterback, has to go out and put 30 points on the board every week just to give you a chance to win.
Right.
I mean, think about someone like Russell Wilson, who, when he came in the league with a dominant run game, the best defense in the NFL, and he did not have to put up, 50, 30 points a
Right.
game in order to compete and win. So I think, with Dan Quinn there, the whole goal is that the defense will be better, and that the offense can kind of play the way they'd like to play. Look, we mentioned the run game. I mean, they don't really have an explosive back. They have backs who are grinders.
Right.
So you have to play to what you have. So, I think the run game, it would almost have to be sustaining by the very nature of who the backs are, because they have Eckler, they have Brian Robinson, who I really like, but he's obviously not, a 4-3 burner.
Right.
Even the Rodriguez kid, second year from Kentucky, he kind of fits the same mold, so ultimately they have grinder type backs. So, I think you're trying to control the pace and tempo of the game. You're trying to have your defense keep the game, you know, close, the score relatively low, and then have your quarterback not have to be, a playmaker on every series.
Right. Could you get a sense of Jaden's football IQ just from watching him this year?
Yeah,
Or how
I
much
mean,
of a sense could you get?
yeah. Well, the only way I can get a sense, John, because I don't know exactly what he's
Right.
asked to do,
Exactly.
as they go through the week, but he's a very composed player. So, and that just may be in his DNA. And I think that's obviously a really good sign. You never got the sense that anything was frenetic, even when he left the pocket. He seemed to play with a poise that was built into just who he is. And I think that's always a really positive sign. So again, I can't speak to how he was in the meeting rooms, in the game
Right.
planning and all that, but he certainly executed the offense at a high level, and that's all we have.
Right.
Obviously, I don't work for a team, so I'm not spending the time with him that the Commanders did, that other teams did, to learn far more about how he assimilates information, how he can spit it back out. I certainly don't know the answer to that, but he played comfortably.
Right. One thing that Kingsbury talked about too is he felt like he was doing a really good job, that he felt like he was ahead in terms of knowing protections and handling protections. Is that kind of a big thing for a rookie to be able to
Really
handle?
important. I mean, there's a lot of teams that don't have the quarterback deal with that, even some really good teams. The 49ers, for instance, don't have the quarterback handle protections. The quarterback can override something
Right.
if he receives it, but they have the center handle the protections. But I think that you're ahead of the game if you feel like you can handle protections and that your young quarterback can. Now, you may not want to put that on his plate, but you
Right.
may say to him, hey, if you really see something, override it, and then go from there. I think you'd like your young quarterback, to be able to do that, because the last thing you want to see with a young quarterback is those free runners where no
Right.
one picks up a free runner,
Right.
and very often that ends up being on the quarterback.
What do you think Zach Ertz and guys like Ertz and Eckler have left?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Ertz has played a long time. He's been a really, really good player. He's probably at this point more of a, 12-yard in type of receiver. And having said that, that doesn't mean he'll never catch a pass,
Right.
John, at 20 yards. That's when I say things like that, that's what people think.
Right.
But he might be more of the safety valve type receiver, which is a really important player for a young quarterback. And Ertz knows how to find open spots versus a zone. He knows how to play off leverage of man coverage. He's one of those guys that could end up, assuming health, that catches a lot of balls for 9 yards a catch, but ends up being a really important player
Right.
because he just knows how to do all those things. I know they drafted
Right.
is it
Senate.
Senat? Is that how you
Senate.
pronounce it?
Senate.
Um, Senate, okay. Senate from Kansas State, who I did him coming out. And I thought he was a solid player. Again, just to me, I didn't think he was a second round type player. I saw him more as kind of an H-back second tight end. I don't know how the Commanders see him, but I think he can be a good player in that role. If they drafted him in the second round, they probably see him as more than that. They probably see him as a number one tight end because obviously Zach Ertz is not playing for 5 more years. So we'll see, who's right there. But they drafted Luke McCaffrey in the third round. And I think he's an ascending type player. I kind of liked his tape. I think he has things to learn, but I think that he's an ascending type player. So we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, they still have McLaurin and Dotson. We'll see. You have to play to your personnel. We saw Kingsbury at times with the Cardinals play with a lot of two tight end sets
Right.
because that's what the personnel dictated. So, obviously the so-called air raid is a spread offense with 3, 4 wide receivers, but Kingsbury's not stupid, and he's been in the league enough now to know that you've got to play with, you got to dance with the girl who's brung you. And if he feels if Sinnott is a really nice player and they feel they can use him in multiple ways, which is kind of how he was used at Kansas State, maybe they end up being more of a 12 personnel offense. You never know. I happen to really like the O lineman they took in the third round, Brandon Coleman.
Good.
I think that I don't know if it's this year, but I think he's a starting quality player.
At left tackle.
I saw him more as a guard, but he did play a lot of tackle
Yeah.
in college, so he has that experience. So my guess is they'll try him at tackle first.
Yeah, because they that's where they have Cornelius Lucas, who's been a backup, and I think they
Yeah,
need him. But we'll see. Like, yeah, if
yeah,
nothing else, he can move inside.
yeah.
Um, what do you think of Eckler at this point?
Um, I think he's a great receiver, and you can, that's the thing with him. You can detach him from the formation. But as a runner, he's a grinder. And in terms of running the ball, I think it'll be a little more like I think Brian Robinson is a better runner than Eckler.
Yeah.
So I don't know how they're going to do that. And again, that's my point of view based on film study. They may see it differently, but I think Robinson's a better runner. But Eckler is a better receiver, and you can do more with him formationally.
What did you think of Dan Quinn as a head coach in Atlanta, and what are you expecting from him here?
I really like Dan Quinn. I mean, again, it's always hard to know. Don't forget those years in Atlanta. He had Kyle Shanahan as
Right.
as his OC, and that's the year, unfortunately they lost the Super Bowl to the Patriots in that weird game. But Matt Ryan had the best year of his career under Kyle Shanahan. So, but Dan Quinn, I think, is a really good just coach in general. Defensively, I think he does some really good things. He played a ton of what we call big nickel in Dallas
Right.
with three safeties. I'm curious to see if he does a lot of that with the Commanders, because I think they do have three safeties who could play in that role, because I think Quan Martin is that kind of player.
I
Because
like it.
Quan Martin came out of Illinois where he played slot, he played safety, he played outside corner. He could be your third safety with Chin and Forrest for sure if he chooses to go big nickel and just, play the two linebackers, Wagner and Louvu. And by the way, I love Frankie Louvu. I think he's a really, really good player. So I thought that was a really good signing. I thought Cleveland Ferrell was a good signing too. He's not going to give you 12, 13, 14 sacks, but he's just, for the Niners last year, he was a really solid every game in, game out player. Just, set the edge, played the run, just a really solid player.
And I was going to ask you too about some of those additions. Louisville, I love watching him as a pass rusher. He was really, really good, and how Carolina used him too. But
Yeah.
is there, what have you thought of their offseason in general, and just from free agency to the draft, and Adam Peters and Dan Quinn and free agency to draft, Jaden, it's all that stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can only, I always tell people when it comes to the draft, I can only tell you my evaluations of the
Right.
players. That's the only way I can do it. I know Newton just had surgery. Who knows what his status is? I think he's an interesting prospect because he's got some inside juice. He's a gap penetrator. I really like Sainer still. He's a really, really good player. He kind of reminded me of Mike Hilton. I think you probably can line him right up as your nickel, and he's just a really good football player. He's just one of those guys. So my guess is you could probably start him from day one as your nickel. So I really liked him. I'm trying to think, what else they did in terms of, we talked about Louvu. I talked about Cleveland Farrell. Obviously Bobby Wagner, who had a good year last year in Seattle. I mean, he can still play, and he's super intelligent. What I'm really curious about is if this defensive staff can get something out of Jamin Davis. Because as you know, covering the team, Jamin Davis is just, he's kind of an athletic freak for a linebacker, but it just hasn't worked. I haven't studied him personally enough to know why that hasn't happened. People throw out all kinds of reasons. They may be true, they may not be true. But, the guy's 6'3", 235, and he's athletic. You hear all the time that he just doesn't see things quick enough. Maybe that's true. I like I said, I don't know. But I'll be very curious to see if this staff can get something out of him, because the guy's got a lot of talent.
Right. I think that's where Wagner steps in. Do you like the direction of this franchise at this point?
Yeah, I do, because I like the quarterback. I mean, and look, you and I both know that if you don't have a quarterback, it doesn't matter about all the other positions. Your quarterback has to be a good player, and I think Jane Daniels will be a really good player. I think you never know with a young quarterback. I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to have a great rookie season, but he's going to be the starting quarterback, and there'll be ups and downs. He'll see some things he hasn't seen before. He'll have some bad snaps, some bad games. But I think the goal here with Dan Quinn is that the defense can keep you in the game, so that, because don't forget, Daniels has the type of explosiveness to him that if you're in a 17-13 game in the fourth quarter and you're losing, and Daniels hasn't had a great game, he can make that kind of play that allows you to win a game, even if he hasn't had a really good game. And I think that's one of the things about the quarterbacks that can make those outside of structure plays is, you can't live on that in the league, but there's times when, that really is an important part of an offense, and he can do that. So, I think that the goal here is probably to have a really solid defense, and with the rookie quarterback, allow him to develop without having to, be every week 25 for 35 for 350 yards, which is not going to happen anyway.
Last question then. What would be the concerns on offense? I mean, I don't know how much you look at their offensive line or anything like that, because I know fans. So what would be your concerns?
That's the concern. I think the left tackle position has to be figured out. You mentioned Cornelius Lucas, who's been essentially a career backup. Brandon Coleman, I really liked his tape. I personally think he's a guard. I'm certainly not an offensive line guru, but I personally think he's a guard, but he's going to get a shot at tackle. I think, Allegretti, I assume, would be the starting left guard if they had to play a game tomorrow. I just think we don't know about the offensive line, John, and that's, so it's a question mark. So right now, I think most people would say that until they play, you don't know.
Correct.
I mean, that's
true.
We just don't know. So I would say that's concern might be too strong a word, but it's a question mark. Let's say that for sure. It's a question mark.
Greg, I appreciate your time. NFL Matchup has always been one of my favorite shows. I learned so much, but I also appreciate how much work you guys put into that to check every single. I used to talk to Matt Bowen about that all the time.
Oh, Matt's
how much work goes in? Yeah, how much work goes into each play to make sure that you're getting it right. And
John, we don't do isolated plays, as you know.
Yes.
We try to pick things that are very representative and reflective of what teams
do. Exactly.
A lot of guys, can just pick a play and break down a play, but we try to put it in a thematic context.
Absolutely. And that's what, but just even going into that, you need to make sure that you're seeing it right and that you have your theme is accurate. So I appreciate the work you guys do, which is why it's always been one of my favorite shows. So thanks, Greg.
I appreciate it, John. Thanks so much.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Greg for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back on Wednesday, another day at OTA practice. So I'll be back on Wednesday with another episode. Talk to you next time.